From the very beginning, something never felt quite right in our house. It wasn't loud or violent, but rather a quiet coldness, like an invisible frost that settled on everything and everyone. My parents, Martin and Eliza, weren't unkind, not exactly, but they moved through life with a sort of muted disinterest when it came to me. I used to watch how their eyes lit up when they spoke to my older brother, Evan, and how my mother would run her fingers affectionately through his hair, even when he was nearly 17. When he walked into the room, something changed. When I did, nothing did. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. I remember being 6 years old, clutching a drawing I had made in school, a messy, crayon-bright portrait of our family, all of us holding hands under a crooked sun. I ran home with it fluttering in my fingers like a trophy. I waited until dinner, then shyly pushed it toward my mother's plate. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said, her voice like lukewarm tea. She didn't put it on the fridge. She didn't even ask what we were all doing in the picture. Evan made a joke about the sun having too many rays, and everyone laughed. I smiled too, but it burned. As the years went on, I became an expert in trying. I tried hard in school, not just for grades, but for the praise that might crack the surface of their indifference. I brought home straight A's, got accepted into honors classes, even won a state writing competition in 9th grade. I left, the certificate on the kitchen counter with a small note. "Thought you'd like to see this." No one mentioned it. 2 days later, it was gone, and I found it in the recycling bin, folded in half with coffee grounds smeared across one corner. I told myself it was an accident. There were tiny things, too. Things that should have meant nothing but always did. They forgot my dentist appointments. I only found out from my school counselor that I was supposed to have been vaccinated years before, and it had never been scheduled. My mother said she was sure she did it, but I could see it in her eyes. She hadn't thought about it at all. For my birthday when I turned 16, they gave me a $50 bill in an envelope. No cake, no dinner, not even a candle. Evan got a surprise party 2 months later. I told them it didn't matter, that I didn't want anything anyway. I got good at lying like that. I thought if I could just be more obedient, more helpful, more invisible even, they would start to love me, or at least notice me. I did the dishes before being asked, vacuumed the house on weekends, folded their laundry even when mine was still sitting in a basket untouched. Sometimes I would catch my father looking at me like he was watching a stranger walk through his living room, someone he wasn't quite sure he wanted there. He always looked away too quickly. Evan, for his part, was never cruel, but he didn't include me. He had a tight circle of friends, inside jokes, weekend plans. I was always the sibling who stood outside the door listening, hearing the bursts of laughter and wishing I could step into their world for just a minute. Once I asked him why Mom and Dad seemed different with him. He shrugged and said, "You've always been kind of distant." Distant. I remember blinking at the word, as if he'd slapped me with it. By the time I turned 18, something inside me had curled up and stopped hoping. I left for college with a mixture of relief and guilt, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I had done something wrong that I could fix with time and space. I called them every week, left voicemails, sent photos of campus, of new friends, of my dorm. Most went unanswered. The ones that did come back were always short. "Glad you're doing well. Looks fun. Busy this week, call later." I told myself again and again, they were just reserved people. Not every family was warm. Love looked different for everyone, but there was a night, cold, October, junior year, when I came back from class and found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, handwritten in a script I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly, sitting on the floor of my dorm with my back against the bed. The paper trembled in my hands before I even knew what it said. It was from a woman named Carolyn. She said she had been looking for me for years. She said she had carried me for 9 months, given birth to me in a hospital in Vermont, and held me for exactly 7 minutes before I was taken away. She had been 16. The adoption was closed. She had signed papers she didn't understand, agreed to things she didn't want, and for the past 20 years she had kept my birthday written in a small calendar by her bedside, never knowing if I was happy, safe, loved. I sat there for hours, not moving, not breathing right, the pages blurred under my tears. I read them again and again, like I could somehow reverse the years by understanding them better. Suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. The coldness, the distance, the absence of memory in my parents' eyes when they talked about my birth. The way I had always felt like a guest in my own home. I wasn't theirs. I never had been. And yet, for all the pain of knowing, there was also a strange peace. I wasn't unlovable. I wasn't broken. I just hadn't been theirs, to begin with. I didn't respond to the letter right away. I kept it hidden beneath a stack of notebooks in the drawer by my bed, like a secret too big to touch. Every day I walked past it, pretended I was okay, but I wasn't. My hands trembled when I brushed, my teeth. I couldn't sleep without waking up at 3 a.m., my chest tight like I was choking on something invisible. I would stare at the ceiling in the dark, Carolyn's words echoing in my skull. Held you for 7 minutes. Taken away. Never stopped wondering. I began to question every moment of my life. It wasn't just the coldness from my parents I started seeing differently. It was everything. The gaps in family albums. The stories they never told. I realized they never mentioned what my first word was. Never laughed about the time I took my first steps. It was always Evan's milestones they brought up again and again, like a script. They knew by heart. Mine were blurry, vague. You were quiet as a baby, they said once. That was all I had. I finally called home. My mom picked up. Her voice was cautious, polite, like I was a colleague, not her daughter. Hi, honey. Everything okay? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if anything had ever been okay, if she ever looked at me and saw a daughter instead of a stranger. She agreed to raise. Instead, I asked her directly. I said the name. Carolyn. The line went dead quiet. I could hear her breathing, slow and shallow. Then she said, in a voice I barely recognized, "Where did you hear that name?" I told her about the letter. I told her everything. There was a pause, long and hollow, and then she sighed. It wasn't a surprised sigh. It was tired, like she had been waiting years for this call and hoped it would never come. We were going to tell you, she said, not sounding convincing. One day. I asked her when. She didn't have an answer. My father got on the phone next. His voice was clipped, hard. She had no right to contact you. That was the first thing he said. Not, are you okay? Not, we love you. Just that. I felt my stomach turn. I told him I wasn't mad that she contacted me. I was mad that they hadn't. That I had spent my entire life chasing their affection, thinking something was wrong with me, when they were the ones who had been keeping this entire part of my life locked in a box. You're our daughter, he snapped. But it didn't sound like love. It sounded like a threat. I hung up before they could say anything else. For a few days after, I just moved through life like a ghost. My roommates noticed. One of them, Lana, asked me if I was sick. I wanted to tell her, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain that your entire identity has just cracked in half? That you're grieving a version of yourself you didn't even know was a lie? Eventually, I wrote back to Carolyn. I sat at my desk for 3 hours, starting and deleting sentences, unsure how to even begin. Hi, I got your letter. Thank you. I think I'm ready to know more. That's all I sent. My fingers hovered over the send button for a long time. And when I finally clicked it, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. She replied the next day. Her message was full of warmth. She said she had no expectations, just gratitude that I was willing to hear her out. She sent me photos of herself taken over the years, one at her high school graduation, one from the year she got married, and finally, one holding a small birthday cake with a single candle. Every year I made one for you, she wrote. I'd sing happy birthday even though you weren't there. I cried so hard I couldn't see the screen. She told me more about what happened, how her parents had taken control once she got pregnant, how they had sent her away to a home for girls like her, how she wasn't allowed to see me after the birth, how she had begged to hold me just once, and how after they took me, they refused to give her any updates or information. I thought you'd hate me, she wrote. I hated myself for years. I didn't hate her. I didn't even know her. But what I felt was something warm, gentler than anything I'd felt toward Martin and Eliza in years. I reread every sentence she wrote like it was gospel, like if I could just absorb enough of her words, I'd understand myself better. We started exchanging letters regularly. She told me about her childhood, her favorite books, how she loved thunderstorms because they reminded her of the night I was born, wild and loud and unforgettable. I told her about my life too, though carefully, like I was still testing the water. I told her about my love for writing, my dog back in middle, school, the time I almost broke my arm falling from a tree in 5th grade. I started to feel like someone was actually listening. Really listening. Eventually, she asked if I'd be willing to meet her. Not right away. No pressure, she said. Only if and when you're ready. I stared at that message for hours. The idea of standing face to face with the woman who had carried me, missed me, loved me from a distance, it was overwhelming. But it was also the first time in a long time that something felt right. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not my friends, not my professors, definitely not my parents. I took a bus out to the small town where Carolyn lived, 4 hours north of campus, with nothing but a weekend bag and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. The countryside looked unfamiliar, but somehow comforting. Fields that rolled into mist, tiny diners, and wooden signs weathered by time. I kept checking the address she had sent me, holding it like a secret, like a key I wasn't sure would open anything or everything. When I finally stepped off the bus, the air felt different, cleaner, sharper, like it belonged to a life I hadn't lived yet. Carolyn had offered to meet me at the station, but I'd said no. I needed a minute, a breath, a moment to stand on my own before walking into a world I had only imagined. I walked the 2 blocks to her house slowly, my eyes scanning every face I passed, wondering absurdly if one of them had my nose, my eyes, my mouth. Her house was small, white with blue shutters, and there were flower pots on the porch railing, even though it was late fall. I stood at the gate for a full minute, trying to find the courage I thought I had. Then the door opened, and she stepped out. She looked like me. That was the first shock. Not exactly, but enough to make my knees weak. Same eyes. Same curve in the mouth. Her hair was darker, streaked with gray, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. She was holding a dish towel in one hand, like she'd dropped everything the moment she heard me outside. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. We just stared. Then I stepped through the gate. She met me halfway across the lawn, and then I was in her arms. She smelled like lavender and something warm, something I couldn't name, but felt like home. Neither of us said anything for the longest time. I felt her body shake as she tried not to cry, and I wasn't doing any better. My tears soaked into her sweater, and for once, I didn't apologize for them. We went inside eventually, after what felt like an entire lifetime in that embrace. Her house was modest but full of life. Family photos, soft quilts, little stacks of books beside every chair. There was a picture of me on the mantle, one I hadn't even known existed. A baby photo. Me in a hospital blanket, my face red and crumpled and new. She saw me staring at it and said quietly, "The nurse took it before they brought you to the other room. It's the only one I have." I didn't have words. I just nodded, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling. She made tea. We sat at her kitchen table with steaming mugs between us, the sun streaming in through the lace curtains. I had so many questions, but for the longest time we didn't need words. She told me about her life, the quiet grief, the years of silence, how she'd never stopped wondering. I told her about mine, the years of confusion, the aching emptiness, the constant striving for love that never came. I always felt like I was too much and not enough all at once, I said, staring into my cup. She reached across the table and took my hand. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just stolen from where you belonged. We talked for hours. She showed me letters she had written to me over the years and never sent, dozens of them, tucked in a worn shoebox, ink faded from age. One for every birthday, every milestone she imagined. "I didn't know where you were," she said, "but I wanted you to have a mother's love anyway." I read them through tears, laughing at her little jokes, gasping when she guessed things that were oddly true. My love for poetry, my fear of thunderstorms, my habit of chewing on pens while thinking. Later, we went for a walk around her neighborhood. People waved to her, smiled, called her name. She introduced me to an older woman named Janine as my daughter. The word caught in my chest. I wasn't used to hearing it from someone who meant it. I felt like a person again, not an afterthought. That night, I stayed in her guest room. She'd made it up with fresh sheets, a candle burning softly on the nightstand. There was a framed photo of her and her husband, who had passed a few years back. She told me he knew about me. "He used to talk about you like you were already here," she said. "He wanted to meet you so badly." I cried again, my body exhausted, emptied out from emotion, but I slept better than I had in years. When I left 2 days later, we didn't say goodbye. We said, "See you soon." Back at school, everything felt changed. Not in a way anyone else could see, but I could feel it in my skin, my breath, my heartbeat. I carried a new kind of weight, but this one was grounding, not crushing. I had a truth, now, a history, a mother who wanted me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't trying to fit myself into someone else's story. I was beginning my own. Then the messages from Eliza started. She said she wanted to talk, that she was sorry, that things were more complicated than I knew. I didn't answer the first few. I wasn't sure I owed her anything. But curiosity and anger are siblings, and both were growing. When I finally picked up her call, her voice was softer than I remembered. "I know we failed you," she said, "and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to understand. We didn't know how to love you the right way. We were scared. And we thought that if we just treated you the same, the feelings would come." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I told her the truth. "You didn't treat me the same. You treated me like I was a guest you weren't sure would leave." She cried. I didn't. Something in me had already let go. I told her I needed time, and she said she understood. Maybe she did. But I had found someone who didn't need time to choose me. Someone who had chosen me from the very first breath, and every single day since, even when I didn't know it. It took me months to fully understand the shift inside me. I had spent years molding myself into something I thought would be lovable, polished, quiet, helpful, invisible when necessary. But I was done with that now. The armor I had built for survival didn't fit me anymore. It was tight, brittle, and no longer necessary. I had been seen, really seen, by someone who hadn't laid eyes on me in 2 decades, but still recognized me with the softest certainty. That kind of love doesn't need permission. It just is. Carolyn and I started seeing each other regularly. We spent long weekends together. She visited my campus, sat in on one of my poetry readings, beamed so wide in the front row, I almost forgot how to speak. We cooked dinner together, took walks in the park, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. She asked about things that no one had ever asked before. What makes you feel safe? What were you most proud of as a kid? Do you like the sound of your own name? I didn't always know how to answer, but the questions themselves healed something. The more I opened up to her, the more I began to open up to myself. I stopped apologizing when I took up space. I stopped shrinking when I laughed too loud or cried too easily. I started writing with a new voice, stronger, rawer, mine. I turned in an essay about family for a class and didn't change the names this time. My professor called it a gut punch in the best way. I smiled for hours. As for Martin and Eliza, I didn't cut them out, but I didn't pretend anymore either. I set boundaries. I told them what I needed if they wanted to be part of my life. I didn't demand love. I demanded honesty. At first, they flinched at the distance, tried to call more, texted articles and weather updates like they were trying to speak in a language they didn't know. But eventually, something softened. My mother asked if she could write me a letter. I said yes. It was clumsy, full of qualifiers, but there were apologies in it, real ones. She said she was sorry for how little she understood. She said she had spent most of my life afraid of the depth she couldn't give. She ended it with, "You didn't fail us. We failed you." And I hope that one day we can earn a place in your truth. I wept when I read that. Not for her. For me. The truth was, I was never broken. I was just a puzzle missing a corner piece, carrying an ache I couldn't name. Now that piece had a name. A voice. A history. Carolyn taught me that love doesn't expire, that family isn't defined by signatures on a birth certificate, but by choice, by effort, by presence. She told me that every year on my birthday she would close her eyes and whisper into the dark, "Wherever you are, I love you," and I think some part of me had always heard it. Last month she gave me a box. Inside were little things, scrapbook pages she made for birthdays she missed, a pair of baby booties she had crocheted while pregnant, a necklace with a small locket. I opened it and saw the tiniest picture of the two of us on the day we first met. Our first photo together, her arms around me, my smile wide and tearful. I wore that necklace for a week straight, tucking it under my collar like a secret I was no longer ashamed of. And on my next birthday, I invited both of my mothers. They sat on opposite ends of the table at first, stiff, awkward, strangers bound by the same wound. But as the night went on, something incredible happened. They talked. Not much, but enough. Carolyn thanked Eliza for raising me. Eliza thanked Carolyn for giving me life. I didn't need them to be friends. I just needed them to be real. And for the first time, I saw a reflection of myself in both of them, not in blood or behavior, but in resilience. In complicated, imperfect, enduring love. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen. I looked out the window at the soft blur of stars and felt a quiet peace I had never known. I wasn't just someone who had been adopted. I was someone who had survived the silence and found her voice. Someone who stopped begging to be loved and learned how to love herself instead. I had spent so many years trying to earn their love. But in the end, it wasn't about earning. It was about finding. And I had found more than I ever imagined.